President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden will be facing off in the 2020 presidential election. US presidents are, of course, voted into power by the Electoral College, a body of 538 electors pledged to vote on behalf of their state or district. Generally speaking, a plurality of a statewide vote determines which candidate that state's electors will vote for. Although in Maine and Nebraska, while 2 electors are chosen in this way, both states also allocate 1 elector for each of its congressional districts. Maine has 2, Nebraska has 3. To win the presidency, a candidate must secure an absolute majority of at least 270 Electoral College votes. In this video, I'm going to produce a few different Electoral College map projections for the 2020 election. I'll build a map based on the most recent head-to-head statewide polling and fill in the gaps with solid historical trends. I'll also use this data to project a path of least resistance for both major presidential candidates. I'll also compare 2016 polling data against actual election results to show the level of reliability that polling this far out has in determining presidential elections. In the end, while I think it's too early to draw firm conclusions, I hope my analysis will help to answer some of the questions surrounding the question, who will win? In order to produce our Electoral College map, let's begin by identifying the safe seats, states that aren't really likely to swing from one party to the other. On the Democratic side, states like California, Washington, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts have a strong recent history of voting consistently Democratic. And there is some polling data for all of these states here indicating that they're once again a lock for the Democratic Party and Joe Biden. Adding all of these states to the map gives the Democrats 141 Electoral College points. Next, we do the same for Republicans, adding historical Republican strongholds where we also have at least some polling data to support the precedent. This gives Republicans a starting point of 97 Electoral College points. Of course, there are some states that are almost inarguably safe states based on historical precedent alone. These are states where there isn't really any good polling data, but this is for the most part because no one's really bothered to poll the states. These are generally speaking smaller states with a consistent presidential voting record. Each has voted for the same party in at least 5 out of the last 5 presidential elections. For Republicans, this includes Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Arkansas, and Louisiana. It also includes the 2 Electoral College points that Nebraska as a state assigns, as well as the state's 1st and 3rd congressional districts, each having 1 elector. For Democrats, we're adding in Vermont, Oregon, Rhode Island, DC, Illinois, Hawaii, and Maine's 1st congressional district. Now, many of the states left are probably not accurately described as toss-ups or swing states. There's probably not a strong chance that New Hampshire or Nevada will vote for Trump. Texas and Nebraska's 2nd congressional district are not likely to go to Joe Biden. But I hope we can agree that these states currently colored red or blue are not liable to change party allegiance in the 2020 presidential election, whereas both parties have at least some chance of taking each of the states left in brown. Now, we do have polling data for each of these brown states, which will allow us to determine whether polls are currently favoring Biden or Trump for a general election win. But before we do that, there are a couple of oddities to sort out. First, there's the congressional districts. There's no presidential polling data available for the individual districts within Nebraska and Maine, each of which cast their own Electoral College votes. And the 2nd congressional district of each state has an inconsistent presidential voting record. In the case of Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, it's voted Republican in 4 out of the last 5 presidential elections. The exception was in 2008, when fearing a potential Electoral College tie, Barack Obama heavily targeted the district with ads and managed to win it over. Theoretically, Biden could do the same thing. But given that the district only went blue under pretty unusual circumstances, I'd say the district is likely to go Republican again in 2020. Next, there's Maine's 2nd congressional district, which has voted for Democrats in 4 out of the last 5 presidential elections. This district is a little more complicated because the Republican to win it was, of course, Donald Trump in 2016. You could argue that Maine's 2nd congressional district constitutes a part of overall changes to the Electoral College battlegrounds brought about in the Trump era. There are larger trends where Rust Belt states and Florida appear to be more Republican than ever, as the Southwest and Georgia have generally moved towards the Democratic Party. So there's an argument that Trump is likely to win the district again because it's part of a larger trend, but there's also at least one good reason to suspect that Democrats will take the district back. In 2018, that very same district ousted a Republican incumbent congressman in favor of a Democrat. So maybe the district will swing back, maybe it will stay loyal to Trump. I personally think of it as kind of a toss-up, but I'm going to mark it as leans Republican, just so we have a decision made on it for the time being. Another oddity is the state of Georgia. Currently, the polling average is an even split between Biden and Trump, so the polls aren't indicating a lean in either direction. This forces us to rely on historical trends to determine who's likely to be the winner. While Georgia is clearly becoming a more democratic state, the last time it went blue in a presidential election was in 1992. With decades of reliable Republican voting, to me it makes sense to project that the state leans Republican, even if the polls aren't currently pushing in that direction. But with all the states that now remain brown, polling does give us some indication about who the state will go for. Let's begin by identifying the states that lean most heavily in the Democratic direction. Colorado is leaning Democratic, with Biden polling on average 16.67 percentage points above Trump. Minnesota has a slightly lighter Biden lean, with plus 12% in his direction. Next, New Mexico, plus 10.5 for Biden, Virginia, 9.67, Maine, plus 9.3, Michigan, plus 7, Arizona, 5.67, Nevada, plus 5. Now let's add some states with Republican leans. Iowa favors Trump by 4.67 percentage points, Ohio gives Trump a 2-point advantage, and Texas currently leans Trump by about 2/3 of a percentage point. Now, the next most Democratic state that has yet to be added is Pennsylvania, which currently leans toward Biden by 4.3 points in the polling averages. As you can see, that's enough to win the election for Joe Biden. He also leads slightly in the polling averages in Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, and New Hampshire, all by less than 4 percentage points. Winning all of these would give Biden 330 Electoral College points. To win the presidency, the Republicans' path of least resistance, according to the current polling, would be to win all of these states, including PA, which would give Trump a final Electoral College count of 283. To accomplish this, the incumbent would have to win all the states where Biden's polling advantage is 4.33 percentage points or less. Now, is that actually possible? Well, yes. Obviously, the polling can change significantly between now and November, and opinion polling isn't everything. To demonstrate just how much the polls from around late May of an election year can vary from actual election results, let's look at the swing states during the 2016 presidential election. Here is a chart comparing the election results on the far right to the polling averages around this time of year in 2016. For Colorado, polling averages were tied at this point in the election cycle, but on voting day, the state went to Hillary Clinton by a healthy margin. She got 4.91 more percent of the state's vote than Donald Trump. On down the line, though, you can see that much of the shifts were not favorable for Democrats. While Democrats enjoyed a healthy lead of about 10% in Michigan polls, Trump ended up winning that state by less than a percentage point. Even in states where Dems held on, much ground was lost. For instance, in Maine, Dems were leading in the polls by nearly 15%, but Trump managed to shrink that lead down to a less than 3 percentage point difference. At this time of the year, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, and Iowa were all showing promise for Democrats in opinion polls. But by November, those leads were all lost. Every one of those states went to Donald Trump. So let's look at all of these states on one chart. Now, the shift column here indicates the difference between polling around this time of year and the final election results in 2016. As you can see, while the overwhelming majority of states shifted towards Trump, marked with an R for Republican, some states did net gains for his Democratic challenger. Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado all shifted more Democratic than predicted in the polling averages. So what if we had a repeat of 2016? What would happen if the results of the 2020 election shifted in exactly the same ways from current opinion polling between Biden and Trump? Well, if we experience the exact same polling average to election day shift as we did last cycle, Democrats would still hold on to Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, Virginia, and believe it or not, Florida. Trump would scoop up Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. This is an interesting result because it means that the single electoral college point districts in Nebraska and Maine that have some chance of being up for grabs could actually play a serious role in the election. If both go Republican, it would just barely give Trump the 270 he needs to win. Ditto if the same happened for Biden. If Nebraska's 2nd district remains Republican and Maine's 2nd goes Democratic, we'd end up with a tied electoral college. Even though we haven't seen the electoral college fail to produce a president since the 19th century, it's not a totally impossible situation. A tied electoral college could also come about through this distribution as an example, which by the way is not based on polling, it's just a map I built from my gut before I consulted the polls. Even without an exact tie, the electoral college can also fail to produce an outcome just by being close, if you factor in faithless electors. In 2016, a total of 7 electors voted against the party they were pledged to vote for. In a tight race, that can make all the difference. Even if a candidate wins more electors than all others, they still need an absolute majority, 270, to actually win the presidency through the electoral college system. If neither Biden nor Trump, by the way, succeeds in securing 270, the election gets settled in a procedure called a contingent election. Basically, the House of Representatives would elect the president and the Senate would elect the vice president. This would probably result in a President Biden and a Vice President Mike Pence. Strange to think that there's an actual possibility that Congress could decide who will win.